He hadn't planned for this. No one does. Life doesn't come with warnings or instructions. You don't wake up one day and think, today's the day I'll meet someone who could tear down the walls I've spent years building around myself. And yet, that's exactly what happens. He thought he knew what his life was going to be. The steady beat of his footsteps on the pavement, the cold nights in the patrol car, the quiet conversations with his colleagues. He'd always done the right thing, always followed the rules. It was the only way to survive, to keep everything in order. His life had always been black and white, no room for gray, no room for uncertainty. Nathan had been a policeman for years. It was more than a job to him, it was a calling, one that demanded discipline, focus, and sacrifice. But as the years passed, the weight of that sacrifice began to settle into his bones, not just in the form of long hours or missed family dinners, but in the quiet loneliness that followed him wherever he went. Marriage is a commitment, Nathan would tell himself. You honor it, even when it's hard, even when it feels like it's slipping through your fingers. But the truth was, he didn't know how to fix it, not then, not when he still wasn't sure of who he was or what he wanted. His ex-wife had been the one to finally walk away, and Nathan, always the steady one, had simply let her go. It wasn't out of indifference. It was because he didn't know how to reach her, or how to fix the fracture that had quietly grown between them. In the end, they both knew that neither one could continue living a life of quiet resignation. It had been amicable, or at least as much as a divorce could be. Still, the pieces never fully fit back together after that, and Nathan, though he had never spoken it aloud, felt the weight of that loss more than he cared to admit. Nathan, his fellow officer, Mark, would often say during their late-night patrols, "You're working yourself into the ground. You can't keep ignoring what's happening in your personal life." Nathan would smile, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, and brush it off with some excuse. Tyler didn't believe in love anymore, not the way people talked about it, at least. He'd seen it all, the ups and downs, the highs and lows of relationships, and in the end, he learned that love was a fleeting thing. It was something that promised the world and often left you standing in the ruins. The broken promises, the quiet betrayals, the pain that lingered long after the other person had gone. Tyler had felt all of it. And when he left his last relationship, he swore off the idea of love altogether. He wasn't looking for anyone, especially not someone like Nathan. Tyler's story was one that had been written in the scars of his past. A quiet man by nature, he'd never been the kind to wear his heart on his sleeve. He wasn't bitter, but the idea of trusting someone with his heart again felt like a mountain too steep to climb. He had given so much of himself to people who hadn't valued it, and when it was over, all he had left were the memories. He had his friends, his routines, and a small, quiet life that didn't ask too much of him. And, most importantly, it didn't expect him to give anything away. He liked it that way, but then Nathan walked in. It wasn't supposed to be anything more than a brief interaction. A stop-in, a glance, and a polite exchange. Yet from the moment their eyes met, something shifted. Nathan, still dressed in his uniform, stood at the entrance of the gallery, the starkness of his attire in contrast to the warmth of the paintings around him. He was a world apart from the artists and dreamers who frequented the space. And yet, there was something in the way his gaze lingered on the paintings, something that reminded Tyler of the parts of himself he had locked away long ago. "Didn't expect to find someone like you here," Tyler had said with a smile, his voice quiet but warm. "I always thought police officers stayed on the streets, keeping the peace. Not, you know, here, surrounded by, well, art." Nathan's laugh was short, almost nervous. "Yeah, I guess I'm not what you expect. But sometimes, you need to see something different. Something more than the job." Tyler paused, sensing something in Nathan's tone that wasn't just about the art. "I never thought I'd meet someone like you," Tyler continued, a little more honestly now, especially not like this. "But here we are." It was a simple exchange, but it was charged with something. Something real. He wasn't supposed to care. He wasn't supposed to feel the pull he felt, but there it was, undeniable and impossible to ignore. Nathan felt it too, though he tried to dismiss it. His life was already complicated enough. He had a past he wasn't ready to face, a job that demanded everything from him, and a future that felt uncertain. Yet, in the brief moment their eyes locked, in the gentle way Tyler's words hung between them, Nathan felt something stir, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. For the next few days, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that had crept into his heart, a feeling that grew stronger every time he thought of Tyler. He tried to push it away. He had a life to live, a job to do, but the thoughts of that brief conversation lingered in his mind, taunting him, reminding him of the things he had forgotten he wanted. Focus, Nathan, he would tell himself, staring at the road ahead during patrols. You have responsibilities. There's no room for this distraction. The mornings started like they always did, with the hum of his alarm clock and the certainty that the day ahead would be just like the one before. Nathan followed the routine: get up, grab coffee, and drive through the familiar streets, but something in him had changed. Every glance at his phone, every message from Tyler, made it harder to keep things in check. He couldn't deny the attraction. He couldn't ignore the way his heart raced when they spoke, when they laughed, when they stood close enough to feel the warmth of each other's presence. It was a force too strong to dismiss, and yet Nathan felt the pressure mounting. Should I even be doing this? Nathan thought to himself during the quiet moments of his patrol, his hands gripping the wheel. I can't afford to lose everything over something like this, the words echoed in his mind. And yet, the pull between his duty and his desires wasn't simple. Every stolen glance, every message, every touch, no matter how brief, added to the weight of what he could lose. Nathan couldn't help but replay his conversations with his close friend Mark, someone who had known him for years and who could see the struggle in his eyes. You're pushing yourself too hard, Nathan, Mark had said one evening as they sat on the hood of the patrol car, watching the night unfold around them. What's going on? I've never seen you like this. If this isn't just some passing phase, you need to figure out what you're doing before it catches up to you. I can't afford to lose everything over something like this, Nathan had muttered, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. I can't just throw everything away, my career. The way people see me. I've worked too hard for all of it. Mark nodding slowly. I get it. But no one can live like that forever. You're human, too. Maybe it's time to figure out what you really want. One afternoon, Tyler, in a rare moment of free time, had invited Nathan to join him on a tour of the city. It wasn't much a walk through places that were once familiar to both of them, but had now become landmarks in their shared story. For a few moments, there was no uniform, no career, no duty. There was only Nathan and Tyler, two people lost in the simple joy of each other's company. Tyler led him to a secluded park, one Nathan had never noticed before. Hidden behind a canopy of trees, it felt like an oasis within the chaos of the city. It's one of my favorite places, Tyler said softly. No one really knows about it. It's my escape, I guess. Nathan couldn't help but feel that same sense of escape in Tyler's presence, the way everything else faded into the background. The city seemed to quiet around them, as if holding its breath, but the moment was fleeting. The weight of Nathan's responsibilities was never far behind. He couldn't forget the questions that lingered, the ones he wasn't ready to answer. They had just begun to talk about where their paths might go, about what could be between them, when Tyler, sensing Nathan's hesitation, looked at him with a quiet frustration. Nathan, he said, his voice low but piercing, you've been distant lately. If this isn't worth fighting for, then what are we doing? Nathan's heart skipped a beat, his mind raced. Was this the moment? The moment when it all came crashing down, when the walls between them crumbled? Or was it another crossroads, one where he would walk away? For weeks, Nathan had wrestled with his emotions. I've been lying to myself, Nathan thought, staring out of his apartment window late one evening, watching the city lights blur in the distance. I'm scared of losing you, but I'm even more afraid of never having you at all. His phone buzzed with a message from Tyler, a simple text asking if he was okay, but it was more than just a question. Nathan finally decided to meet Tyler. When he walked into the small cafe where they had met so many times before, it felt like coming home. Nathan, we can't keep doing this, Tyler said softly, breaking the silence. His voice was calm. We can't keep running from this. What's more important to you? What are you really afraid of? I don't know, Nathan admitted, his voice shaky. I don't know what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid of losing everything. My career, my life. I've worked too hard for everything I have. I don't know how to walk away from that. I don't know how to walk away from the person I thought I was. And I don't know what I'll be if I let this go. Tyler stood up then, his face soft but firm, as if he had heard enough. I don't want to be your escape, Nathan. I want to be a part of your life. But I can't do that if you won't let me in. You're the one keeping us apart. You're the one holding yourself back. And I can't do that anymore. Nathan's heart was in his throat. Every part of him wanted to pull away, to retreat back into the safety of his life, but he knew it wasn't what he wanted. But before he could speak, his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize, a local precinct. The voice on the other end was familiar, but the words they spoke sent a chill down his spine. "Nathan, we need to talk. There's something you need to know. Something about your personal life. It's come to our attention." The call ended abruptly, leaving Nathan standing there, his mind racing. Nathan turned to Tyler. "I have to go," he said, his voice filled with urgency. "I don't know what this means yet, but I have to figure it out. I can't lose you. But I don't know what this is going to do to me, to us." Tyler didn't say anything at first. "Nathan, we can't keep running from this. Whatever happens next, we face it together, or we walk away. But you have to decide. You have to choose now. I can't wait forever." It was an ordinary day that would soon be anything but. A routine police operation had gone awry, the kind of thing that happened often enough that no one would have given it a second thought except for the fact that this time, Nathan's involvement wasn't as discreet as it needed to be. Word had gotten out. His colleagues had started whispering, the rumors spreading like wildfire, and the higher-ups were beginning to take notice. In the sterile halls of the precinct, the air felt thick with judgment. He walked into the office of Captain Reynolds, his superior, a man whose approval he had always sought, whose respect he had worked tirelessly to earn. But today, Nathan could feel the distance between them. Captain Reynolds wasn't a man who tolerated mistakes, and Nathan had made the kind of mistake that threatened everything, his career, his reputation, and, now, his love for Tyler. "Nathan," Captain Reynolds began, his voice cold, measured. "There's been talk about you, about your personal life, about the relationship you've been hiding." Nathan didn't flinch. His eyes were steady, though his chest felt heavy with the weight of the conversation. "I don't need to remind you of the importance of discretion in this line of work," Reynolds continued. "Your actions, your choices, they affect more than just you. And now we have a situation we need to address." "I'm not hiding anymore," Nathan said, his voice steady. "I don't have to choose between my job and who I love. This is who I am." Captain Reynolds stared at him for a long moment. "You don't get to choose when it comes to the law, Nathan," Reynolds said, his voice quieter now, tinged with disappointment. "This job is more than just what you want. You're not some civilian, free to make these kinds of choices. You chose this life, and now you're going to have to face the consequences of those choices." Nathan felt the sting of his words, but he didn't back down. He wasn't afraid anymore. "I'm not asking for your approval," Nathan said, his voice raw, but resolute. "I'm asking you to understand that this isn't about choosing between duty and love. This is about me being true to who I am. You want me to be the man you've always known. Then let me be that man. Let me live without fear." The decision had been made. The words had been spoken, and now, all that was left was to face the consequences. Nathan sat at the edge of his bed, his eyes on the phone in his hand. The messages from the department, the calls from his colleagues, the whispers, everything had come rushing in, fast and furious. The weight of the world had always been there, a constant companion. It was a weight that came with every uniform he wore, every decision he made, every oath he swore to uphold. Outside, the rain began to fall, tapping softly against the window pane. It wasn't the kind of storm that struck with fury. He had called Tyler earlier, asking to meet. He had wanted to be with him, to tell him the words that had been locked away in his heart for far too long. He was ready to face the consequences of his choices, ready to stand with Tyler, come what may. When Tyler arrived at his apartment, his eyes soft with understanding, there were no words that needed to be said. Tyler had simply smiled, that gentle smile that made Nathan's heart flutter in a way he hadn't expected. He stepped closer, his hand brushing Nathan's arm in a way that felt intimate but natural, as though they had always been meant to be in each other's lives. "No matter what happens," Tyler had said, his voice steady, his words filled with certainty, "I'll be here." The truth of those words settled into Nathan's chest. There was no question anymore, no more weighing the cost of his actions. There was only Tyler, only the man who had stood by him even when Nathan had been too scared to stand by himself. In that moment, Nathan understood that love, the kind of love he had found with Tyler, was the one thing worth fighting for. The rain outside began to pour harder, the sound of it filling the room, as they stepped out into the night. They walked side by side, their footsteps in sync, as they made their way through the streets of the city. It was a new kind of walk for Nathan, a walk that wasn't hurried, that wasn't bound by the constraints of secrecy and fear. It was a walk that held promise, that held freedom. As the rain continued to fall, they made their way through the quiet streets, their hands brushing lightly against each other until their fingers intertwined naturally. And as they walked, hand in hand, through the rain, Nathan felt lighter. The fear, the worrying, the anxiety that had plagued him for so long, it was gone. They had no guarantees, no promises of what was to come. But what they did have was each other, and that was more than enough. As the rain began to ease and the night grew quieter, Nathan and Tyler found themselves standing at the edge of the city, gazing out at the lights that flickered in the distance. It was a quiet moment, a reflective moment, where the weight of the past and the hope for the future hung in the air. There was no turning back now, no more regrets. They had made their choice, and whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, as partners, as equals, as two people who had found each other in the midst of the storm. Have you ever had to make a tough decision for love? Share your story in the comments below. We all face moments in our lives where we have to choose between our heart and our head. If you've ever faced a moment like that, share it with us. Your story could help someone else who's struggling to make the same choice. And if you enjoyed this story, if it resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You never know who might need to hear a story like this. And remember, no matter what life throws at you, no matter how many storms come your way, always choose love. Because love is worth fighting for. We are Pride Stories Unfiltered, your #1 pride.